Well, this morning we're continuing a sermon series we started a few weeks ago called Tough Topics. And we're really looking at kind of some tough topics that the church has traditionally kind of shied away from, or maybe not intentionally, but we just haven't brought these up from the pulpit. For instance, last week we talked about addiction. And as I mentioned last week, I truly think addiction touches all of our lives, whether we want to admit it or not. It might not be our own addiction, but it might be an addiction. And it might be not an addiction like we're thinking to a chemical substance, but it might be an addiction to something else, like our phone screens and things along those ways. And we've been really taking time to look at these tough topics and really examine them from a biblical standpoint, which is really, I think, the important part. Because if we fail to talk about these tough topics from a biblical standpoint, I think we talk about them from other standpoints. And we get our talking points from the news or from a website or from things like that, rather than grounding them in the grace and truth that is in Scripture. I think we need to do it. I think we need to address these things. You know, we live in a culture that's obsessed with a highlight reel. We don't put on Facebook pictures of us at our worst, right? We put on there pictures of us at our best, the best meal we cooked, my nice smoked ribs, whatever that might look like. We always are constantly putting out our best, the best pictures of our kids, the excitement that they did, the excitement that they accomplished, our best vacations, our most curated family photos, our career wins. We post those things. And sometimes I think we let this kind of highlight reel mentality invade the church. And what I mean by that is simply this. We walk into the lobby and we put on kind of our plastic faces. We put on our highlight reel, fake smiles. When people ask us how we're doing, I had a friend, and I would ask her how she was doing, and she'd always say this. She'd always say, blessed and highly favored, right? And some of you are in that camp, right? Some of you say that all the time too. Yeah, and it's kind of a programmed response. But what happens when we don't feel blessed? What happens when we don't feel highly favored? What happens when the weight of your chest makes it hard to breathe, let alone smile? And I'm not talking about the weight of the smoke making it hard to breathe. I'm talking about the weight of your own life making it hard to breathe. Brings us to our next tough topic we're going to talk about today, which is depression. And just like addiction, I think depression has had an effect or will have an effect on all of our lives. Even if we don't directly suffer from depression, I think because of how prominent it is in our lives today, I think at some point all of us are going to be affected from it. An estimated 51 million Americans report active and ongoing depression. Young adults rates are significantly higher. About 26.7% of adults under 30 report active depression. Roughly 15 to 20% of adolescents aged 12 through 17 experience a major depressive episode annually. And can I just say that number is constantly rising among our adolescents, our teenagers? That number is constantly rising. Gone are the days of just going outside and riding your bike down the street and playing with your friends. And now social media and online capabilities have just contributed over and over again to rising rates of depression among our young people. Nearly 29% of U.S. adults report having been diagnosed with depression at some point in their lives. That's almost 30% of adults in our country who have been reported experiencing and being diagnosed with depression. And those are just the diagnosed ones, by the way. Think about how many people don't get diagnosed, don't go talk to somebody about it. See, we often think of depression as sort of the person sort of moping around, or we think about the kind of the emo character on Inside Out. We see that as kind of how depression presents itself, but it actually presents itself in a whole lot of other ways. Like, it's not just the person who feels down all the time. And you say, that person must be depressed. It's actually more than that. Here's some other ways that depression expresses itself. Irritability and anger, frequent outbursts, low frustration tolerance, or sudden hostility. How about escapism, throwing oneself obsessively into work, into sports, into high-risk behaviors, gambling, reckless driving, substance use, increased alcohol intake, or drug use to self-medicate the depression. How about physical pain, chronic headaches, digestive issues, back pain that does not respond to medical treatment? How about deep worthlessness, intense feelings of guilt, inadequacy, or blaming oneself for external problems? How about chronic fatigue, feeling physically and emotionally drained even after sleeping? Appetite and weight shifts, significant changes in eating habits, often leading to weight gain or weight loss. Depression can present itself in anxiety, high levels of worry or overthinking or panic symptoms to deal with this low mood. Social withdrawal, pulling away specifically from close friends, not just family, but our friends as well. Academic decline, a sudden and unexplained drop in grades or skipping school. Hypersensitivity, extreme sensitivity to criticism, rejection, or failure. Defiance, acting out, getting into arguments, or adopting an intensely negative attitude towards authority. All these are ways that depression presents itself in our lives and the lives of people around us. It's not simply just being down or feeling bad. And here's the reality. Historically, the church has treated mental health as a secondary spiritual issue. The church has looked at it, and we've kind of said, if you struggle with depression, the unspoken and maybe sometimes explicitly spoken diagnosis has been simply this: you lack faith, you have unconfessed sin, you aren't praying hard enough. And we put that out there, and we put it on people, and we've really missed the mark. And we really, instead of helping people through a time of depression, we put that on them, and we've kind of made it worse, quite frankly. So how should we look at depression as a church? How should we deal with it as a church? How do we deal with it in our own lives and in the lives of the people around us? How do we understand it better from a spiritual standpoint? How do we understand it better from a biblical standpoint? We're going to look at a couple of texts today that I think can help us really do it. We're going to kind of dismantle this lie that a mental illness is a spiritual failure, because it's not. And if you've ever struggled with your mental health, I want you to understand that doesn't mean it's a spiritual failure. Now, before we look at the scripture, I want to tell you about somebody in history who struggled with their mental health. If you were to pick probably the most influential preacher of the 19th century, it would probably be Charles Spurgeon. Here was this guy. He was known as the Prince of Preachers. He preached to audiences of over 10,000 people weekly in London. By the way, that was without a microphone, so clearly he had a great voice too. He founded orphanages. He authored hundreds of books, and he was a theological titan of his day. Yet, despite all that, Spurgeon suffered from severe, incapacitating clinical depression. He would actually have to frequently leave the pulpit for weeks at a time and just weep in isolation. His depression was so strong. He actually said this once. He said, I am the subject of depressions of spirit so deep that I hope no one here ever feels like this. Spurgeon, he actually later wrote this. He said, there are dungeons under the castle of despair, which are as deep as hell itself, and ordinary believers may be locked up in them. Now, let me tell you this. If faith, success, deep spiritual knowledge was a vaccine against depression, Charles Spurgeon would have been immune. But he wasn't. Because depression is not a defect of character. It's a condition of our fallen humanity. That's important. And read it again. Depression is not a defect of character. It's a condition of our fallen humanity. Which brings us to our first text today. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 4, we'll see the prophet prophet Elijah. And Elijah, he is going to deal with some great depression. The first part of this in verses 1 through 4, I'm really calling the crushing collapse. It's really the crushing collapse. To understand the Elijah's depression, though, we really have to go back to 1 Kings 18. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah is on the top of Mount Carmel. He has just faced down and beaten 450 prophets of Baal. All right, this is like a big deal. He prayed, fire came from heaven. He won a massive victory. He's flying high. Things are amazing. He just scores this gigantic spiritual victory of his day, the biggest spiritual victory of his day that has ever happened. And look what happens now in chapter 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah and says, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. Then he came to Beersheba in Judea, and he left his servant there. Well, he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, and he sat under it, and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Here's this man, this prophet of God, a man of deep, huge faith, who again, had scored the biggest spiritual victory of the day. And yet here he is 3 verses later in such a deep depression that he's calling for God to end his life. And we look at that and say, well, that's kind of weird. But I think we all go through collapses like that, don't we? We all go through times and seasons of our life where things are riding high, things are going well, things are great, and then something happens, and it's like a spiral that just keeps taking us down and down and down. And suddenly, our mental health is nowhere near where we were in that spiritual high and that spiritual victory. Instead, we're in this place that the prophet was. I think oftentimes we sometimes have highs so high that it can only be followed by spiraling and collapsing and things like that. I think Elijah models when the weight of the world crashes down on us. When we're at the high point and that weight comes crashing down on us, typically it unfolds in 3 stages. They're listed right here. Elijah deals with them. The first is this, the physical pouring out. See, we often overlook this biological component of our depression. In 1 Kings chapter 18, again, going back, right after this victory, right before our text opens in chapter 19, the Bible notes that the power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he had to tuck his cloak into his belt. And it says that he literally outran Ahab's chariot for roughly 17 miles. All right, I have not run 17 miles in my life, all right? You all knew that already. I didn't have to tell you that. I've never run that. I've never had a tuck in my clothes. But here's this guy after the spiritual victory, and he's got to escape for his own safety. So he tucks his cloak in, and he begins to take off, and he's outrunning chariots. He's absolutely outrunning chariots. He survived this life or death spiritual showdown. He executed false prophets. He prayed down a historic rainstorm. And he did an ultramarathon all right after each other. Elijah didn't just wake up depressed. He didn't just wake up depressed. He was physically poured out. He had poured everything out of it. I mean, imagine going through that. Imagine being faced with these prophets. And imagine I get worn. I got to take a nap on Sundays after preaching, right? That's just me preaching to 80 people. Imagine you got 450 prophets of Baal that you're calling down rain and then calling out fire from heaven, and then you're executing them all, and then you're running a marathon. I get winded walking to the back door to beat you guys out on Sunday morning. Imagine the physical toll that it had taken on him. See, when your physical tank is at zero, your neurological defenses drop. Your brain chemistry changes under prolonged stress. So when Jezebel then sends out this death threat, it's the psychological trigger for Elijah. And he's completely defenseless in his mind because he's so worn down. See, depression is a master distorter of reality. Because Elijah's body was spent, his mind could no longer process truth accurately. I think there's times in our life our body becomes so worn down that it takes its toll on our mind and we can't process the truth accurately. It magnified this death threat. It made it look bigger than God, and it completely minimized the fact that just a few short verses earlier, God had set fire down from heaven. I mean, if God literally set fire down from heaven to protect you, do you really think he's going to let Jezebel kill you? But that's not where his mind was at, Elijah's mind was at. He was too worn down. Folks, I believe that there's clinical and I believe there's chronic depression. But I also believe when we are physically exhausted, we open ourselves up more to this depressive state. So my question to you is, are you caring for yourself physically? And I know sometimes that's the pot calling the kettle black. But are you caring for yourself physically so that you can be in the best frame of mind that you can possibly be in? Let's look at stage 2, and I'm going to call this one the private pulling away. Look closely at verse 3. It says, when he came to Beersheba, he left his servant there while he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness. See, this is the most dangerous, predictable mechanism of depression, the instinct to pull away into privacy. See, darkness convinces you of a toxic lie, and the lie is simply this: you are a burden to the people who love you. That is the lie that depression wants to tell us over and over again. You are a burden to the people who love you. If they knew how broken you were, they would reject you. It's better for everyone else if you just disappear. Elijah, he intentionally fires his assistant. He leaves him behind. He leaves his support system behind at the border, and he walks 20 miles into the deep, isolating wilderness. Why? Because shame demands secrecy. When you practice a private pulling away, When you move away from all the people around you who care about you, who love you, who want the best for you, who look out for you, who absolutely want to be there for you, despite what the lie in your head is saying, when you pull away from that, you remove all the guardrails from your life. The servant was Elijah's connection to reality. The one could say, hey, Elijah, I know things look rough right now, but remember what just happened on Mount Carmel? Remember that? Remember how God worked in pretty amazing way? Remember the fire that came down from heaven, Elijah? See, because he pulled away from that servant, there was no one there to remind him of that. And folks, our depression has a way of pulling us away from people because we listen to that toxic lie over and over again. See, when you're starting to feel that the response can't be to pull away, the response, as we'll see later today, has to be to come closer. Because here's the thing. By cutting off his community, Elijah ensured that the only voice left in his head was his own. That was it. The only voice left in his ears was the echoing, distorted screech of his own despair. And depression thrives in an echo chamber of one. That's where our depression thrives over and over and over again when it's just us and our thoughts in our head. But that brings us to stage 3, which I'm calling the painful petition. Elijah eventually collapses under a broom bush, which is a small, scrubby desert shrub, offers a pathetic amount of shade. It offers, and as he's sitting there, he offers up this painful petition. He says this, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Let the weight of this prayer sink deep into your soul. This is not a person who is walking away from God saying this prayer. This was not somebody caught up in a life of sin who is saying this prayer. This is not somebody who's absolutely been broken over and over again by stuff in their life. This was the premier prophet of the Old Testament. This is the man of fire, the man of answered prayer, the Titan of Israel. That's who this person is, and he's begging God to end his life. Notice this phrase. He says, I am no better than my ancestors. This reveals Elijah's depression was tied to this crushing sense of failure and shame. Failure and shame. Failure and shame. He thought his ministry would change Israel's heart, and when it didn't, he internalized the cultural brokenness on his own defect. He thought it was me who caused this. It was me who can't do better than this. The beauty of this text, though, is that God did not strike Elijah down for this prayer. God didn't fire him because he had a suicidal ideation. God didn't accuse him of blasphemy. God welcomed the raw, ugly honesty of the petition because painful, desperate prayer aimed at God is still an act of faith. It proves that even when you want to die, you still know who holds your breath. So what was God's response? What is the response to Elijah? Look how our text continues in verses 5-9. It's the compassionate care. Now let me say this, if you ever felt guilty for feeling depressed, pay close attention to how God handles Elijah. God does not treat Elijah's depression as a sin to be punished. He treats it as an injury to be healed. Two different things. He doesn't send lightning bolt to shock Elijah out of his funk. He sends an angel with provisions. Look at 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 5-9. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there at his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and he drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, and he touched him and he says, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and he ate and he drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. See, when God enters our darkness, I think there's two powerful ways that he responds. The first is this, through provision. God's immediate remedy for this prophet who's broken, who's suicidal, his immediate remedy is have the prophet take a nap, to give him some food, to give him some rest, to give him a gentle touch, some water to drink. See, we often try to over-spiritualize what is fundamentally physical breakdown. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone come into my office and say, Steve, I'm not doing well, and I'll say, when was the last time you slept? Or when was the last time you ate? Because too often times, again, we try to over-spiritualize a physical breakdown. God reminds us here that our brain is an organ. Our body is a temple. It's not a machine. It just can't keep going and going and going. Sometimes the most holy, spiritual, faith-filled thing you could do on a Sunday afternoon is turn off your phone, eat a good meal, and close your eyes and take a nap for a few hours. I mean, sometimes that's what we need to do to care for ourselves. And it's not a bad thing. Let me tell you this. I think we live in a day and a time and place where we think if we take rest, especially we take rest and other people are working, then we're a bad person. Sometimes we need to take that rest so we can take care of our mental health so that we can be the people that God wants us to be for his kingdom. And if we don't do that, we end up right where Elijah was. God knows that we were created from dust. And that sometimes our frame, it needs a rest. God understands this. He tells Elijah, listen, the journey is too much for you. Sometimes we need to prepare our bodies properly and rest. But then look at the second part of it, his provision. Now, the way he provides for him, it's with presence. In verse 11 and 12, God finally adjusts Elijah's spirit, and he does it with tenderness. Verse 11, the Lord said to him, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. See, God tells Elijah to go stand on a mountain, and a powerful wind tears the mountains apart, but God isn't there in the wind. An earthquake shakes the ground, but God isn't in the earthquake. A fire blazes, but God isn't in the fire. But then, in verse 12, comes a gentle whisper. And that's where God is. But why does God whisper? Because he's close. Because he's close. See, a person only whispers when their face is right to your face. If I whisper right now, even with the microphone on, you don't hear it. If I whisper right now, even with the microphone on, you don't hear it. In order for a whisper to work, you have to be standing close, face to face. When you're in the dark, you don't need a loudspeaker shouting condemnation at you. You need a Savior who's down there in the dirt, in the dust, close to you. And he whispers, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. No matter how you're feeling, how down you may be feeling, in these moments of depression, I am here. And my prayer for each of us is that in our time, when we feel that way, when we're in our dust and we're in our despair and we're in our brokenness and we're in those low points in life, that we will hear that same whisper in our ear. I'm here, I'm close, I'm not going anywhere. Elijah's depression lasted for about 40 days, but sometimes Sometimes our depression doesn't last 40 days. Sometimes it stays for a long, grueling season. And for those seasons, I think God gave us Psalms 48. If you haven't read Psalms 48, read it. Most Psalms follow a predictable rhythm, right? Most Psalms, the author complains about their troubles, but by the end of the song, and the end of the Psalms, they pivot to praise. But still I will praise you. Psalms 88 refuses to do this. And it's the only psalm in the entire Bible which ends in absolute unresolved darkness. Lord, you are the God who saves me day and night. I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. I'm overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to the grave. And look how it ends. You have taken me, friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. When those times come, it's important to remember that our isolation is part of that battle. And instead, how we get through those times is through a collective cry. How do we walk out of the dark? I think we walk out of the dark together. See, by including Psalms 88 in the Bible, I think God gives us a permission to not be okay. I think God has given us permission to have times and seasons in our life where we're not okay. But what's really important is that we have people to not be okay with. That we have people that we're able to go to and say, I'm not okay. This is where my struggle is, because if not, then we're back into that isolation. But if we can collectively cry out together in those moments of depression, then we can walk through it together as one. And we can get through it. Listen, there are going to be times where we want isolation, but that's where this body is so important. So my question to you is, number one, are you able to share that with the people around you? Do you feel comfortable to? And if not, what are you doing to make sure that this place is a safe place where people can come and bring whatever garbage, whatever despair, whatever hurt they're dealing with, and we can be there and we can surround them with it? But it doesn't just mean we do it together. It means that we use a collective use of our resources. So as we close, and as the band comes up here, I want to just tell you that I think that we need to collectively use every resource, every tool that God has placed in our toolkit. The first is this, I think, spiritual intercession. This anchors our soul to God's character when our emotions fail us. See, so many times we can let our emotions fail us, but if we can use spiritual intercession, prayer, reading the word, honest laments with one another, if we can do that, then we can tie ourselves back to God's character rather than our emotions, which might be pulling us in a different direction. That's the first part of our toolkit. The second is this. We just kind of talked about it. It's communal connection. It's breaking the isolation by forcing the dark into the light. Being part of community groups, by the way, if you want to lead a community group in the fall, you want to host a community group in the fall, send an email to the church office. We need community group leaders. But we also need people to be in community groups because that's how we rid ourselves of isolation. How about regular check-ins with your church family? Listen, we have elders at this church, but it's not just their responsibility. If you see somebody who hasn't been here for a while, how about giving them a call? How about asking them where they've been? How about saying, is everything all right? Is everything okay? I care about you. I want to know what's going on in your life. Or how about the people in the pews next to you who are here? When was the last time you checked in with them and asked them how they're doing? I think it's important. And then finally, the final toolkit that I think God gives us is this clinical intervention. Fixes the broken biology and the chemical imbalances of a fallen world. Listen, I'll be the first to admit, you can have a pastor and a counselor. I do. It's good to have somebody to talk to. It's good to have somebody to open up to. It's good to have somebody that you can go to and you can know, you can pass whatever's going on in your head and you can pour it over to them. And it's also good to have medical support. There are times when I believe that God has, I share this all the time. My sister's a research pharmacist. I believe that God made her super smart so that she could develop super cool medicine to help people. And it's okay. It's okay to take use of that medical support. It's all part of that toolbox. We need to use it all. Church, we can get through these moments. We're going to have them. If we sit there and say, well, if we just have strong enough faith, we won't have depressive times. That's not true. Church, we can get through the depressive times, and we can break that cycle. But we have to use our full toolkit that God gave us. Listen, if you can have Charles Spurgeon, if we can tap into the prophet Elijah, it's going to happen to each of us. We have to be ready and prepared, and we have to help each other through those times. Let's consider those things as we stand and sing together.